Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for part 23 of the record collection tour. When last we left off, we were in the middle of the S's, and I'm just going to spoil it right now. We are going to be in the S's for the entirety of this part, as well as the part that comes immediately afterwards as well. Quite a few significant artists, quite a few personally significant artists for me that are in the S's, so really just want to take the time to talk about all of them, because that's why we're here, after all. So without further ado, let's dive right on in, and we're going to start with this classic jazz record, Nina Simone's Little Girl Blue. Now, I have not heard the entire Nina Simone discography, so I can neither confirm nor deny whether or not this is truly her best record. But man, if this ends up being her best record, or my personal favorite anyways, after I've explored all of her stuff, absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, because I think this is absolutely phenomenal. One of my favorite jazz records of the late 50s. She has such a sultry and smoky voice to her, and is such an expressive pianist and vocalist that the atmosphere of this album is, it truly, along with the record that we're going to talk about in a moment, defines the aesthetic of the 50s nightclub in the best possible way. And the song choices here, I think, are super fitting, like Mood Indigo and Don't Smoke in Bed. Plain Gold Ring, I really like. It works so well. And she is such a phenomenal performer. Watching videos of her live and just how invested she gets in what she is performing, how laser focused she is. It's something to behold. It's something to behold. Such a special talent. And somewhat underrated, I think. Underappreciated by the general population, I think, for just how significant she was and how wonderful she was. But anyways, I digress. From one jazz legend to another, Frank Sinatra. We're going to start with this record, which is a compilation of some kind of randomly assorted Columbia tracks. The compilation is called Come Back to Sorrento. I mainly got it, one, because it was cheap, and two, because it contains Sinatra's version of Come Back to Sorrento, which is one of my favorite vocal performances of his in the Columbia years. It's not on one of the studio records. So I wanted to pick this up. It is a really, it's a solid collection. A couple of these were on traditional studio albums. But again, you have to remember, this is Columbia era Sinatra. This is before the LP was a dominant format. And a lot of the best material would not make it onto a full-length record, or a collection of 12 inches. So what we have here, is it the best, or the absolute best Sinatra stuff on Columbia for the most part? I wouldn't say so, but it's a good little collection. So if you have it, you might as well snag it. And let us go to some other Sinatra stuff. For people who have watched the channel, you will no doubt be aware that I made a video on Frank Sinatra where I discussed and ranked all of his studio albums. So if you want more in-depth discussions about any of these records, go ahead and reference that. But I will talk about these at least briefly here, starting with In the Wee Small Hours. This pressing apparently is, I'm given to understand that this is a pressing from the 50s and is actually kind of rare. And kind of valuable. So really stoked to find it. Again, I think this record is very much in the same club as Little Girl Blue, in the sense that it's all about the vibes. And I think the atmosphere is so sublime on here that even if it's not my very favorite selection of Sinatra songs overall, I think this captures an aesthetic as well as any Sinatra record ever did. And my favorite song on here is actually one that is also on the Little Girl Blue, Mood Indigo. Absolute phenom of a vocal performance. Absolutely outstanding. Only the Lonely. I'm not going to spoil where this record falls on my Sinatra rankings, but the number does begin with a 1. So I'll let you think about that for a bit. It's a remarkable record. It's a remarkable album. I will say, and I'm actually not sure if I made this point in the video, but they did remix this record a few years back. And that remix adds a lot to what was already a really great sounding album. So if you've not heard it, give it a try. So many fantastic vocals, so many fantastic arrangements. I could go on and on. And I would, but we have a lot to get through. We then skip pretty majorly. I think a lot of the records that I own here were ones that I got years ago, and that I was just kind of, I was very attracted to like the vocal performances specifically on them. So we're going to jump all the way to the Concert Sinatra of 1963. Pardon the trains, if you can hear those. I'm sure they're getting picked up to some extent. The Concert Sinatra is just a powerhouse of a record in terms of vocal performances, because it's Sinatra stepping up to an orchestra and a backing arrangement that is literally like a soundstage orchestra. Like this is like a Hollywood type of setting. And so he has to go big or go home, and he absolutely does go big. And stuff like I Have Dreamed, Old Man River, Soliloquy at the end. It's some of the best Sinatra vocals, certainly of that era, if not of all time. September of My Years, the Sinatra Turns 50 record. Gordon Jenkins coming back to arranging this one. He'd arranged a couple of other records in the early 60s for Sinatra, but this is the big comeback. And of his 60s and onward pieces, this is the one that comes the closest to matching the sound of his classic saloon records. I didn't even mention Where Are You and No One Cares because I don't own those records on vinyl at this point. But September of My Years, I think, is fantastic. I think his voice has really matured in a really great way at this point. So it's a very interesting record to listen to and like interpret and evaluate how his voice has aged since like his Columbia years, especially. And it's a really pleasant album cover too. I mean, look at it. It's just really pleasant shades of green and blue. When the Wind Was Green being, by coincidence, my favorite song on the record, probably. The World We Knew from 67. Sinatra at this point is doing a lot of like faux Dean Martin records where he is trying to have some sort of crossover pop chart success. And this is one of the better ones, I would say. But it's not quite like, it's not a highlight for me. I will say that. I do like the title track a lot. Something Stupid is not bad. The Nancy Sinatra duet. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but some people really dislike it, and I'm not one of those people. But for the most part, you know, it's not quite his rock record, which some people like to say it is. Yes, there's electric guitar on the title track, but that's about it. But it's nice. Good album. This record, I think, by definition, is nice, and that's about it. Cycles from 68. This is Sinatra doing a bunch of like folk and pop songs and things like that. And yeah, I mean, it has both sides now. By the time I get to Phoenix, Gentle on My Mind. So there's a couple of Glenn Campbell records. Again, folk and country. It's Sinatra doing those types of sounds. Mix the two together and you're going to get this record. I mean, it sounds exactly like you'd expect. I do really like the version of By the Time I Get to Phoenix on here, though. I think Sinatra pulls, like, doesn't pull the most out of that song because, again, the Glenn Campbell version exists, but he does quite well with it. I think it fits in pretty damn well. Okay. Sinatra and Company from 1971. 50% songs with Antonio Carlos Jobim. And then 50% Don Costa arrangements of popular songs like Close to You, Being Green, Leaving on a Jet Plane. I don't really like it when Sinatra goes down that route, especially now that we're in the 70s. So I am partial to the first half for sure, the Jobim stuff. It's not quite at the level of the first record that they did together, which I really want to own on vinyl because that's fantastic. But it's still very strong for the most part. I love Wave as a song in general, but to me, I think Sinatra's version of it is the best version of it. I adore that track. Okay, some nice things I've missed from 1974. I don't know why I have this album, frankly. It's one of his worst, for sure. Very guilty of the critique that I just levied on the last one about there being a lot of arrangements of popular songs, also done by Don Costa here. Sometimes it's okay. I like What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life, for instance, but Satisfy Me One More Time and his version of Bad Bad Leroy Brown just are better left not talked about. And then he goes on a hiatus until he comes back with this record, and I'm so glad that I own this one. And the fact that I apparently had a Half Price Books 20% off sale sticker stuck to it makes it even funnier. Here is Trilogy, Past, Present, and Future. This is very... I think I mentioned this in the video, but if not, then I need to mention it here. This is a Todd in the Shadows core record. Like, if I am running the YouTube channel Todd in the Shadows, or if someone knows Todd in the Shadows, or if Todd, you're watching this, please listen to this record, or please tell Todd about this record, because you could have a field day with this. Specifically, the third record of this Yes 3 LP set, Reflections on the Future in 3 tenses. What time does the next miracle leave? That song alone could be the backbone for an entire YouTube video. It is a special song. One of my favorite things that I've ever read in any music critique ever was a review on Rate Your Music, which talks about that album and specifically mentions that song as being a very strange track where Sinatra talks about how much he hates the planet Pluto, says "you bet your ass," and demands a cheese pizza. Just an amazing string of thoughts, but it's exactly what happens in this song. You have to hear it to believe it. I'm telling you. Okay, LA is My Lady. This is a good album. This is pretty good. And pretty good for Sinatra to me means this is actually really low on my list, but I don't mind listening to it. It's very contemporary, very of its time, and there's definitely some moments where it's like, okay, yeah, we're using 80s synths here. But the arrangements and the production done by Quincy Jones and Phil Ramone, I think, are actually quite good and very tasteful, which makes sense. I think Quincy Jones, he has a jazz background, obviously, so of course he would know how to treat the voice of Old Blue Eyes. But yeah, and that's all the Sinatra that I have right now, so I kind of just aggregate it as it comes up as I find records that I think are reasonably affordable. So yeah, let's keep on moving. And we're hitting another big one for me here. A really big one. I have got Elliott Smith to talk about now, and we start with Roman Candle. I adore Elliott Smith. I'm trying to remember exactly when I got into him. It was probably like 2018, 2019, somewhere around that time, pre-COVID. Because I'd heard so much about his music, and I think I finally caved in and listened to Either Or, because that was the one that people had recommended the most to me. And that record I might have listened to even in like 2017 or something. But I just kind of started exploring his stuff and really getting into like every aspect of his discography. And before you knew it, I became like a super fan. I think it also helps that Smith's music is very depression centric. It talks about depression, and not in like an uplifting, like self-help type of way, as in a this is my lived experience sort of way. I live every day like this. And it's really powerful. It's really affecting, really tragic, given how everything ended for him. Plenty of themes of addiction too. And he pairs these very like personal and deep themes with this songwriting style and the sense of melody that is a combination of like folk and like slacker rock, punk, punk in attitude, less in sound for the most part, and then like Beatles. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, Elliott Smith was extremely influenced by the Beatles, and you absolutely hear that, I think, in his choice of melodies and some of his arrangements and stuff. And being a Beatles super fan, of course, I'm going to love that. So I adore Elliott Smith. I love every single one of his records. And so, of course, I made a concerted effort to get every one of them on vinyl. I'm happy to say that I have them all. So again, Roman Candle. Of the proper studio records, this is my least favorite probably, which makes sense. It is the most low fidelity of them all. It is the one with the weakest songs on it probably, which is not saying very much, because most of these songs I think are terrific. And stuff like Condor Avenue, for instance, I think is up there with like his best storytelling for sure. And it's his first album. So, the guitar playing, I think Smith's guitar playing, which I have not even talked about, but I think that's a huge element of his sound, and his ability to overdub guitars specifically is so damn good. It's so effective. It's, dare I say it, I don't know if there's any major artist for sure who has been able to overdub acoustic guitars as effectively and as interestingly as Elliott Smith has. And you really hear it on this record, although I think it gets just even more pronounced in the following couple of records. And then fun fact is that I actually visited Portland, Oregon earlier this year, and I visited the house that Elliott recorded Roman Candle in, which is owned by someone else now, or at least used to be owned by a James Mercer, I think. No, I can't remember now. Major musician from the last 20 years or so owns that house, or at least owned it very recently. Self-titled record from 95. I think this was the last Elliott Smith record that I got my hands on. There was a while where it was very hard to find most of his albums for reasonable prices. I think it was during COVID when demand was much higher than what the output of the supply chain could provide. But this is phenomenal. This is phenomenal stuff. Again, I think the acoustic guitar overdubbing, just looking at that alone, and electric guitar, there's some of that too here for sure. Man, I don't know if it gets better than this. It's not much higher quality in terms of just raw sound than the Roman Candle, but I think the songwriting takes a big leap here, and I think the just effectiveness, like it feels like he is better at recording by himself. He already knows how to record. There's the Heat Miser stuff, which I think I already touched on in a previous video. But boy, howdy, this is so good. Every single song on here I think is a highlight. But Clementine, Alphabet Town, Good to Go, I adore. So much good stuff on this record. And if you've not seen the clip that I was just watching, I think last night, of Elliott Smith on this morning show in either Oregon or Washington, I think, that Tom Bergeron was hosting, where he feels like really out of place and it's really uncomfortable, and they're trying to be goofy and banter with him, and he's not really having any of it. And then he pulls out his acoustic guitar and plays Clementine and just kind of stuns the room into silence. It's one of the most bizarre live performances you'll ever see, but it's really, really something to watch. Highly recommend it. Okay. Either Or. Now, this is an interesting edition because this is the 2 LP expanded edition that was released for its 20th anniversary. So it contains a bunch of demos and outtakes on its second disc. Really happy to own this. Yeah, it's hard. Just these records, these first 3 records especially, I think so much of what makes them good overlaps. And yet I would not say that they are identical records at all. Like Either Or, for instance, has more prominent drums. The instrumentation is becoming more layered. It's going to take a completely different turn with the following stuff, but there's already more like sophisticated arrangements going on here, which is really cool. And you have some of his most evocative and just kind of dare I say it, like commercial songwriting without trying to be commercial, like Between the Bars, Pictures of Me, I would argue, Angelus, Say Yes, some of his most popular songs, without a doubt. Um, and a lot of the songs that would end up helping make him famous on the Good Will Hunting soundtrack. Again, I got no notes. Even like my least favorite song on this record, which I don't know. Maybe I don't know what it would be. Cupid's Trick, maybe? Again, I still think it's really fantastic. Um, and again, cool to have the version with the demos on it as well. XO. My birthday record, kind of. I think this was released 2 days after I was born. So there you go. I've revealed my age if I haven't done that already. Yeah, much fuller sound here, obviously. And even the acoustic tracks are, sound like they were recorded in a professional studio, which they were. But Elliott's songwriting, it's amazing how much it just kind of leaps to the task here. And it's like, okay, we're using a fuller production. We've got more instruments and overdubs and stuff like that at my disposal. All right, I'm just going to write songs that match that atmosphere. And I'm not saying that stuff like Waltz Number 2 or Baby Britain or Bled White couldn't work in an acoustic setting. I'm certain they could, but they take on such a new life with the pianos and drums and guitars, and everything else that they add. A question mark with the saxophone on it, which I think is really cool. So damn effective. So damn effective. Like I say, Waltz Number 2, I think, is one of his most hook-based songs. It's just so, it is such a lively tune, and yet it's just, there's so many morose undertones throughout it. Yeah. And two of my very favorite Elliott Smith songs are on here. I don't know that I have like a clear number one, but Oh Well Okay and I Didn't Understand, the acapella piece at the end, are both absolutely up there. And put Baby Britain up there too. I think that shit is fun as hell. Such a great instrumental on that record. This is the hardest Elliott Smith record to find for a decent price. I think I paid like $60 for it. It's among one of the largest sums of money that I've ever paid for a record, but I wanted to have it because it might be my favorite. Figure 8. This, if we're talking about the Beatles allegations, like let's say we have this hypothetical scenario where Elliott Smith wants to escape the Beatles allegations. This is the evidence to ground him in reality. In my humble opinion, you cannot listen to this record and not get at least a little bit of a melodic hint of stuff that was coming out in like Revolver or Abbey Road or the White Album to some extent. I think it swims in that atmosphere. And if you buy the CD version that has bonus tracks or whatever, there's a version of Because on there, which is very apt. This has the grandest arrangements of any Elliott Smith record, for sure. And stuff like Junk Bond Trader and Happiness, The Gondola Man are emblematic of that. You still have the intimate stuff, of course. Everything Reminds Me of Her, which is one of the biggest gut punches of a song that Elliott ever wrote, at least for me personally. Easy Way Out is really nice. Better Be Quiet Now. Somebody That I Used to Know. A lot of like great quieter stuff here. But you also have these like great, fantastic instrumentals. Like Son of Sam, like the piano on that record, on that song is just takes off. LA, like one of the tightest rock instrumentals that he ever put to tape. I love Wouldn't Mama Be Proud. Color Bars is just so lightweight. The way that piano and his vocal melody just dance among each other. It's just that's the type of thing. I mean, like when I think of Elliott, I think of some of the best qualities of John Lennon and Paul McCartney as songwriters. It's the angst of Lennon the genuine angst of Lennon mixed with the melodic sensibility of a McCartney. No, I don't think he's quite as good as McCartney, because I think McCartney is one of the best melodists who's ever lived. But stuff like Color Bars, like that to me is like a McCartney type of melody or melodic idea in the way of how it bounces around everything. It's so fucking effective. It's so good. It's also good. And yeah, the day I do an Elliott Smith ranking on this channel, if it ever comes, is just going to be, it's going to be a lot more of this. It's just going to be me gushing over every album, because almost every album is like 10 out of 10 if I were to rate it. And then From a Basement on the Hill, his final record, considered a proper studio album anyways, even though it was released posthumously. There's a lot of the White Album in this one. A lot of people make that comparison, especially because it was originally intended to be a double record, and that's sensible enough. I can certainly see that. It definitely has some of his rawest tracks. Stuff like Strung Out Again is very barren, and there are tracks here certainly that don't feel finished. Like it feels like they've patched everything up well enough to where it is certainly listenable. And much more than listenable, in fact, but it does kind of feel like maybe the vocal was not recorded as cleanly as it could have been. But again, you have some of the heaviest stuff he's ever done on this record, like Coast to Coast, Don't Go Down, Strung Out Again, Shooting Star, kind of. So it makes sense that the vocals would work that way. So I don't know. It just all clicks again, even though it's unfinished. It's probably my favorite posthumous record of all time, if I'm being honest. And then A Fond Farewell, Twilight, The Last Hour, Memory Lane. Such a great little guitar part in that record. So much. There's so much good stuff on here. That's the Elliott Smith record that has grown on me the most. It before was probably my least favorite, and now it's jumped up to whatever place it's at now. Again, it's a big fight at the top. Who knows? And who cares, really? It's all good. And then I do own New Moon as well. I wanted to make sure that I did get this. This is the posthumous record that's much more of a compilation, because it's a collection of outtakes, mostly from the mid-90s, I believe, mid to late 90s. And yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Some demos. There's a demo of Miss Misery on here, for instance. And other outtakes. A couple of covers. His cover of Big Star's 13 is really fantastic. Absolutely fantastic freaking song. I should get a Big Star record at some point. I probably will do now that I'm saying it. But so that's Elliott Smith, another artist who is very special and dear to me. But we have even more left to go, so we'll power through these, and we actually won't have a lot to say about some of them, including this. I got this as part of another collection. It's a band called Sunfire. I know that this is a local band. I say that because it literally says recorded and mixed at Cookhouse Studios in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I don't know anything else about them, if I'm being perfectly honest. I have never listened to this record at all. And in fact, looking at the song titles here, I'm pretty sure this is a Christian rock band of some sort, with tracks like His Love Is Real, Only on Sunday, Search and I Hope You Find Him, Body of Christ, He's the Only One. Okay, so see, again, I know nothing about them, but maybe they're good. I haven't heard them, though. A few Bruce Springsteen records, most of which I have inherited as part of other collection, one other collection specifically. Born to Run, because of course, have to have a little, this record. I could be contrarian, and sometimes I am, by saying that I prefer Nebraska to this, or that I prefer Darkness on the Edge of Town to this, and some days I do. But hard to argue with the instrumentation on this record. I think the instrumentals on here are probably the best that Bruce ever had backing him. And the core songs here are so damn good, so evocative. It's just, I don't know. I will say it's been a while since I've heard Bruce's discography. And I think that was before a couple of his most recent records have come out. So I'll have to revisit again. But Thunder Road, 10th Avenue Freeze Out, Backstreets, Born to Run, Jungle Land. Some of the best songs of the 70s right there. It's an undeniable record. Really great. I own The River as well. An album that I think would be worth revisiting for me. There's a lot of really good stuff on here. I remember being maybe a little bit burned out by the length. But sandwiched in between, because it's sandwiched in between my two other favorite Bruce Springsteen records, I think, and it's not like this is much lower, like this is still like borderline top 5 Bruce for me, but I think it could rise further in my esteem with a revisit. So I look forward to doing that. And then another one that I think could rise, Born in the USA. I don't have it here. I might show it in a future video, but as part of this collection that I got, I also received a collection of 12-inch singles from the Born in the USA like release process, I suppose. So like every single from that record is included in this like little box set, which is really cool. Really happy to own that. Born in the USA, again, this is probably a borderline top 5 Bruce record for me. It has some of his best hooks on it, which makes sense because there's a lot of very successful tracks on here commercially. And, you know, everyone says that this is a record that people don't understand and that the title track is a song that people don't understand. Like people take it literally and they don't look into the actual like meanings of the words or whatever. I don't know. I think it's very true. I think, you know, I grew up in a family that was not a huge into Bruce Springsteen at all. I think just because I didn't like his voice, but yeah, I will say, I think Bruce is he's a very subtle writer. Like he's an everyman writer who I think nevertheless is still like much deeper than he lets on at first glance, which is really cool. And which is why I really respect him a lot as an artist. And yeah, Nebraska's on my list. I did almost get it recently on vinyl. So I look forward to eventually investing and taking the plunge there, because that's where I think possibly his very best songwriting is at. And then we finish with Ringo Starr, with a few different Ringo Starr records. The reason I have this many for the most part is because Ringo records are very easy to get for very cheap prices. And it's like, you know, I'm a Beatles fan, so of course I'm going to collect things that are Beatles related. Sentimental Journey from 1970. This is his jazz impressions record, produced by George Martin with a bunch of different guest arrangers. It's a novelty record. I mean, the singing is not very good. The arrangements are fine. Some of them are very good even, but I don't know. He kind of warbles his way through it. I don't think anyone really took it that seriously when it came out. And when it came out, everyone was invested in the whole like Beatles breakup thing. I mean, that was the talk of the town. So the album kind of got buried because of it. We then skip ahead past Buku's of Blues, which is a shame because that's one of my favorite Ringo albums, to another one of my favorite Ringo albums. That is Ringo, of course. It is his best, I think, without a doubt. I think most people would agree with that. Even if you are not a big fan of something like, say, You're 16, which I would totally understand if you're not big into that, because that's a creepy song. I think the sound of this album, the general vibe of this record, is as enthused as you will ever hear Ringo. It's as enthused as you'll probably hear most of these musicians, to tell you the truth. Like John Lennon sounds like he's having a great time on I'm the Greatest, which you can't say for a lot of his guest appearances on stuff in the 70s. Photograph is a great song out of context, regardless of any of this. 6 O'Clock is fun. Oh My is really good. It's a good album, and it sets the stage, perhaps unwittingly, for the entirety of Ringo's future career, or at least the majority of it. Like it sets the stage for the whole all-star band thing right there. But before we get there, we have to go through other stuff first. So I don't own Goodnight Vienna on vinyl, which actually kind of surprises me. But I do own Ringo's Rotogravure. which to me is the record where it starts going downhill a little bit. I don't think these songs are much to write home about. I think compared to the previous two albums, the other Beatles collaborations and contributions on here are just absolutely nothing. It did not sell very well. And we're coming back to the Todd in the Shadows thing here. He proceeds to make an interesting pivot that is arguably a more commercial pivot, but also certainly not with Ringo the Fourth. Ringo the Fourth is a demented album that takes the sound of disco and imbues it with this overall like sense of alcohol and booze. Like in a way, it's one of Ringo's darkest records because there's stuff like Drowning in the Sea of Love where it almost feels either representative of what his life was like then or what his life and career would turn into in just a few short years. It's so kind of off the mark and kind of uncomfortable to listen to, but in a way it makes it kind of brave at the same time. Like, wow, Ringo's sort of, again, maybe unwittingly taking an artistic risk here, which he doesn't do for the rest of his discography. I'm going to tell you right now, Ringo Starr's discography for the most part is at best skippable and at worst god-awful. Speaking of god-awful, Stop and Smell the Roses. This is kind of a sad album just because I think this could have been better, but the premise of the record was built in part off of Ringo receiving a few songs from John Lennon, and Lennon might have had a reasonably big hand in this record. And then Lennon was shot before he could give the songs to Ringo. And so we are left with this mess that has a bunch of different cooks in the kitchen and a bunch of different songs, a bunch of different bad songs. There's a rendition of Back Off Boogaloo with a horrifying screech at the end that is one of the worst things I've ever heard put to tape. It's awful. It's really bad. Old Wave. This one is kind of cool. I'm glad I got my hands on this because this is actually a rare record. Not as rare as some of his like 2010 stuff now. Like something like Why Not or something commands ridiculous money at this point. But Old Wave was released on a very small scale in only a couple of countries. I think only in Australia and Canada or something like that. So there aren't a ton of these records floating around. At least not until recently. They just reissued it on vinyl, I want to say. But yeah, I actually think this is a good album, though. I think this is actually one of Ringo's better records. I think because Joe Walsh produces it and takes such a commanding role, and maybe it's because Joe Walsh, like the Eagles had recently broken up, Joe Walsh is looking for some outlet to vent, and he just puts his anger and frustration into this record. But man, it rocks. It rocks pretty hard at times, and Ringo is kind of in tune for some of it. So for that alone, for being a perfectly fine, like early 80s rock record, it's one of the highlights of his career as far as I'm concerned. Two more to go. This is a bootleg that I found at a record shop in Minneapolis called Ringo Starr Riz Off. 14 Fab Gear Rare Tracks. I had to buy it as soon as I saw the cover. It was absolutely fantastic. It is a bunch of predominantly live songs and stuff from Ringo, like television appearances and stuff. Not actually a bootleg that I have like a lot of time for, although I think there is some stuff on here that Ringo might have done in the studio at this point. I actually don't really remember. This is around the time, this came out in the late 80s, I think. And Ringo was doing like country sessions at that point, trying to record a country album, but it was just, the sessions were a complete disaster and they were called off. So I can't remember offhand if any of those tracks were on that bootleg, but thankfully for himself, primarily himself and his wife, he got healthy, went to rehab, and came back, got some, commercial appeal in the sense that he formed his all-star band. It became basically a novelty touring act, which he's been ever since. And he's released a ton of records since the early 90s. Almost none of them are good. Most of them, quite a few of them anyways, are quite bad. And I do own this record because it is quite bad. It is one of my least favorites of his, although not my absolute least favorite. That is Postcards from Paradise. This album is a meme. The song, the title track, is a meme. It is entirely predicated on the idea of shoehorning Beatles song titles into the lyrics at any cost, and it is kind of glorious for making that endeavor. The rest of it is just bad. I mean, all the stuff that Ringo did and wrote with this producer whose name I don't even remember at this point, and I can't find it in the credits anywhere. But any work that he's done with this producer that he's worked with on his last few albums has just sounded excruciating. Really obnoxious, really poorly balanced, a lot of auto-tune on his vocals. It sounds awful. But Postcards from Paradise is arguably the funniest of those records, with the exception of his most recent full-length album, What's My Name, which has the song Gotta Get Up to Get Down. If you haven't heard that, highly recommend it. It is good for a laugh or two or 20. And with that, that concludes this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. More reviews, more videos like this are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Appreciate you watching, and until next time, I will see you right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.